Hello everyone, this is my ASMR video of me reading a book with my fan on in bed. And that's it. Here we go. Yeah. The Damned by John D. MacDonald. Prologue. The air had a clean, new morning smell. Manuel Forno paused for a moment on top of the ridge near his adobe home to inhale more deeply, to enjoy the morning more thoroughly. It was indeed one of the very best mornings. A good morning for Manuel Forno, public servant. Off to the right were the distant cream and white and yellow buildings of San Fernando, village of his birth. And down the long slope to the left he could see the muddy ribbon of the Rio Conchos, pleasantly gilded by the early sun. Manuel began to trudge down the slope, humming snatches of Agustin Lara's bullfight music. Silverio. It would be good to save much money one day to go to the capital, to Plaza Mexico, perhaps to see Silverio Perez himself. If one were careful, he shrugged, there would never be enough pesos. Face it, Manuel, they pay you a tiny quantity of pesos for pulling hard on a wire cable. This effort causes a ferry to swim across the Rio Conchos. Free ferry, courtesy of the Estados Unidos de Mexico. And once the far shore is reached by, you turn around and cause the beast of a ferry boat to swim back again, carrying at the most 2 cars or 1 large truck on each voyage. Face it, Manuel, he told himself. Should you ever save enough pesos, Rosalita will use them to take a camion that will carry her in 3 hours north to the bridge between Matamoros and Brownsville, Texas, and there she will arrange to cross the bridge and spend those pesos on Americano merchandise of fabulous prices. He sighed heavily, feeling almost sorry for himself, back and forth across the river all day, a burro serving the arrogant turistas. And then, as he turned left down the shoulder of the road toward the ferry landing, he cheered up as he remembered the sparkling new ferry that had been provided just recently so that El Presidente could ride across the Rio Conchos in style. How splendid to be at last rid of that ancient ferry, that grotesque waddling old lady of a ferry, that hideous gray-scabbed old beast. The new ferry had paint that would shine in the sun. And a large crew, 4 men on the catwalk. Manuel felt the sun on his shoulders and knew it would be a hot day. On such a hot day, one should not work too hard. It was bad for the health. Through long practice, he had learned that it is possible to appear to be pulling on the pinch bar that grasps the cable without, in reality, using any force at all. It was merely necessary to keep the arms rigid so that the muscles of the back would not appear to be slack. It would be a useful trick on such a day as this. The road turned and slanted down a steep place in the riverbank, and he saw the clean shine of new paint. It could make a man proud rather than ashamed to cause such a splendid creature to swim back and forth across the river. It was fitting that the Rio Conchos should have a new ferry. Once one considered it carefully, it became obvious that this was a most important crossing of a most important river. There was but this one way to go, by vehicle, from the city of Victoria to Brownsville, Texas, merely this one road, unless, of course, one wished to return to Victoria, drive an incredible distance north to Laredo, Texas, and then travel through Texas east to Brownsville. He glanced across the river and stopped suddenly, appalled. Cars were lined up on the far side of the river. What a grotesque start for the day. Just when one expected a few pleasant hours of leisure without too many interruptions for the purpose of hauling the craft across the river. Oh. When he came around to the bend, he saw that the ferry was not on the near shore. It was, for some reason, about 15 feet from the shore. His fellow workers stood hip-deep in the muddy water in front of the ferry, grubbing with shovels. He stopped again, and a small interior voice advised him that this might be an excellent day to disappear. But Vascos turned and saw him. "Come here, Manuel!" "Forno," he bellowed. Manuel adjusted his face into an expression of amiable idiocy and marched down to stop in front of his diminutive boss, the jefe of the ferry, the one who labored only with the tongue. "What, Vascos, are they doing?" "Those curious implements are shovels. Perhaps you have heard of them. A shovel is a utensil with which one digs. And there is one for you. Kindly dig." Manuel stared blankly at him. "Why?" Vasco's face darkened ominously. "Because you are told to dig, senor. I shall explain. I shall use the little words. Kindly note the river. What do you see?" "It is much smaller than yesterday, Vascos." "Much smaller, and growing smaller each moment. Perhaps it will disappear entirely. Perhaps you will disappear entirely. Poof! That is too much to hope for." Manuel eyed the shovel and backed tentatively away. "I shall be glad. Come back here." The river has dropped so that it is no longer possible to bring the ferry close enough to the shore to either load or unload those vehicles. Thus, it becomes necessary to dig with the shovels to create a channel to get the ferry close enough to the large, so that large timbers can be used as a ramp, rather than the steel one on the ferry. Have I confused you? I'm going to take a sip of this very spicy ginger, wild ginger. Wow. Okay. "But the old ferry," Manuel said weakly, "the old ferry did not need so much river. We have a new ferry. It is perhaps too big for the Rio Conchos. On each trip, it is necessary to dig with shovels." "I do not feel well, Vascos." "Either use the shovel, or it shall be used against your head." "Vascos, listen to me. I do not have your intelligence, that is certain. However, could we not wait until the river ceases to drop? Then it would be only necessary to dig one time at each bank. Most of those who wait are only tourists. They have no place to go, and they travel with great speed. Let them wait." Vascos stuck out his chest. "It is my position to keep the ferry in service." "Such an attitude can be overdone, Vascos." "Perhaps, but it has been said that Atahualpa will cross sometime today. Atahualpa will cross sometime today." Vascos took out his handkerchief and wiped his forehead. The mention of the name made the shovels fly faster in the hands of Manuel's fellow workers. "Ah," said Manuel, "the politico. When that time comes, strength will come to you, Vascos, out of fear, and you shall pick up the ferry on your back and run lightly across the river." Vascos stared at Manuel for a moment. Then Vascos went over, picked up the shovel, brought it back, and handed it to Manuel with a bow, saying, "If you would be so kind, senor." I wish it were possible for me to say that this is a pleasure, Manuel replied. He went slowly over to the small shack that served as Vasco's office and began with the slowest motions to take off his clean white shirt. The men in the river yelled angrily at Manuel, telling him to hurry. Manuel rewarded them with a sad, tired smile. This splendid day had soured itself with startling speed. 3 vehicles on this side, and many on the other side. He picked up the shovel, examined it inch by inch, and set it down again. He removed his sandals and placed them near the neatly folded shirt. He picked up the shovel again and walked slowly into the warm, muddy water. The mud spread up through his toes. The others made room for him, gladly. This, said Manuel, as he made the first thrust with the shovel, might become a long and discouraging day. He began to dig, doggedly, all chance of escape gone. Perspiration oiled his brown shoulders. I, he told himself, am a picturesque Mexicana, and the turistas with their bright, empty faces will be clicking their little black boxes at me as I swing this hijo of a shovel. When work is inescapable, one must perform it. From work comes pesos. From pesos comes food. With food, you are able to work. It is a trap, but food keeps Rosalita warm and round and gives one the necessary strength to do what is necessary and proper to that warm, round brownness. The bait in the trap, perhaps. He labored, but made certain that he kept an ample amount of energy in reserve. When Atahualpa crossed the river, it would be necessary to work like a madman, beating the brown water to create a creamy froth. He debated the results that would come from greeting Atahualpa with a shovelful of mud. No doubt in 3 days the body of one Manuel Forno would rise to the top of the river. Each time he straightened up, Vasco's was watching him. Manuel experimented until he found that precise working speed which would keep Vasco's annoyed, yet not cause him to bellow. All right, that was the prologue. See you next time.